San Francisco, California. 1856. 10 years had passed since the end of the Bear Flag Revolt, when the Americans of the East entered California illegally and decided to overthrow the Mexican government in Yerba Buena. The Americans took over the state with the Treaty of Guadalupe 1848, and the Californios slowly began to lose their lands. With the new government and more Americans arriving, the city of San Francisco continued to grow a lot in a short time to be home to more than 30,000 inhabitants. Fanfare from the newly arrived people exploded from their mouths frequently. They celebrated the great achievements and openings of elegant businesses among so many new streets. It was said that in the past 5 years up to 1,000 passengers between Americans and foreign immigrants arrived each week through the port. A strong buzz for this attraction was that it was easier in California than on the East Coast, away from the bloodbaths of big cities, such as New York. But there were things that still did not change. The bad smell in the bay remained. Some things have improved. There were more buildings and streets. Even some paved ones, such as Washington Street. Although not all the streets were completely clean, and never clean of horse manure. Before, in the city there were always riders and open carts. Now there were stagecoaches taking people everywhere, even to remote areas on the California mining route. Some business owners of bars and gambling rooms began to look outside the city when rumors grew of state laws that would ban gambling. Not all foreigners stayed in one place. The French miners with whom Apollon and Louis partnered became desperate and walked away with the profits they made. After a while the two of them also left La Grange. They decided prospectors' business for the time being. They felt that no one would ever find enough gold to get rich in that place. They didn't see the way to the fortune in gold they wanted. They understood that it was better elsewhere because the place was full of unnecessary risks and fortuitous dangers. Robberies and fights between miners of different nationalities were frequent. During the gold rush there were no clear laws regulating the right of ownership in the mining fields. Disputes over greed continued and several went too far. The most ruthless murders over gold, land, and water were frequently read about in newspapers, such as the Stockton Independent. The two realized they would make more money working in the city, and so they returned to San Francisco. They found lodging in a secluded place. This time it was impossible to find a place to live that was close to everything as before. Rents rose quite a bit. After a while, Apollon got her job back at Madame Pleasant's mansion, this time as a cook. With the savings slowly growing, Apollon saw crime growing in the city as well. And although Louis spent a lot of time in bed due to his poor health, she knew that he would not be able to defend the savings of the two. He didn't even know how to shoot a gun. Safety was a common topic of conversation that year among people. And at a small meeting at Madame Pleasant's mansion with her friends, while one of her associates was talking to a stranger, Madame Pleasant reproached Apollon for the lack of safety. She told her that she had to stop hiding the money from her savings in the house or in her brazier. That she needed a safe deposit box. This conversation did not go unnoticed by that stranger. When the money increases and you can fill your belly, the brazier gets bigger, but the safe your back destroys, Gustave said in French with an inappropriate sarcasm. With his blue eyes he looked at Apollon's in a way that few men dared to look at decent women. She couldn't hide her nervousness and an abnormal attraction to him filled with apprehension. No man in all this time had approached her in such a way. "Don't listen to that man," Madame Pleasant whispered. She suggested her to ignore him. She judged the scene as inappropriate and censured Gustave for what he said. That behavior in the house was reprehensible. Gustave had a masculinity that terrified. He was wearing a dark frock coat that looked like a semi-formal tailcoat. It reached knees, and the shape did not hide the long Belgian percussion pistol he was carrying. It was impossible to pretend that one did not look at that weapon. He carried it because he thought. but actually, he was the remains of a dangerous man, and he learned well to hide it. And if one of his old acquaintances saw it, wouldn't believe it. That he was no longer half of that European man of immediate fortunes and romantic conquests of one night. He was an orphan and spent his childhood in a hospice in France, until the day they tried to move him to a boys' home, and he escaped. He didn't know about living together as a family in the same house, about happiness in a home, about games with siblings and discussions with relatives. He never learned it despite the different wives he had, or when he lived with the children of some of them. Because of her age, he was a man who could no longer learn it. He couldn't fit into that life with a decent woman, let alone have a family. He was not interested in what the housewives were asking for. No one taught him what they wanted. He never had anyone. He only knew about the women in the bars, the gambling rooms, and the street. Maybe he had learned something, but it was difficult to prove it. He had the unpleasant taste for destroying the beauty of innocence in women. There were never any witnesses left. He was evil by nature and didn't like people to know it. Madame Pleasant was not intimidated. She knew his type well. He was a businessman who had prospered with the money he stole from wealthy women and widows that he conquered in France and Belgium. He wore a black hat with a very high crown that he bought in France shortly before the long trip. He thought it would bring him good luck in the next ventures. Speak with the accent of English immigrants, and that helped him locally. Among them he used to make jokes in very bad taste. He said as if it were a joke that the English immigrated to America seeking to escape their sins and trying to commit worse. Also, that the Mexicans stole California from the native Indians, and that is why the Americans stole it in the war from the Mexicans. Fortunately for him, his tasteless comments remained anonymous. This is because he used two names that he printed separately in his businesses. Very few knew it. The first in Monterey, California, as the owner of an elegant salon, several tables, private gambling rooms, and 3 French hostesses. The other name, Gustave's, in the new bar that recently opened in San Francisco, west of Rincon Hills. It was a small French-style salon. That business was one of the few where there was a safe box. An old, heavy steel Tilton and McFarland with combination locks in Arizona. In the town of Tucson, a place of historical importance for its proximity to the Camino Real Trail. Recently, he had been in talks with several investors. They were just waiting for the moment for the Transcontinental Railroad to enter the territory. He was already thinking of a new name to use. He had to go unnoticed because he had a reputation for offering very bad salaries to his employees. It was the main reason. He wanted to be able to do the same ruthless things in the next place.